Hey everyone, a massive welcome to all you 10th graders out there joining us today. You are seriously in for a massive historical journey. In today's explainer, we're going to cover what I think is one of the most exciting and honestly most crucial chapters in your entire Class 10 social syllabus, national liberation movements in the colonies. We're going to be traveling across continents, witnessing the fall of giant empires, and really just looking at the sheer unstoppable willpower of everyday people. So grab your notebooks because we're going to make this history incredibly clear, super colorful, and visually unforgettable.
So think about this for a second. How do you actually defeat the most powerful empires in the world? Back in the early 20th century, everyday citizens, we're talking farmers, students, factory workers, were facing down colonizers that had massive armies and seemingly endless wealth. And yet, they won. How is that even possible? Well, that is the ultimate recipe for revolution that we're going to be exploring today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our geographic tour for today. We'll start with the fight for freedom. Then we're going to look at three specific case studies: China's road to republic, Vietnam fights two empires, and Nigeria forging one nation. Finally, we'll wrap the whole thing up with the price of independence, so you know exactly how to structure your notes.
All right, Section 1, the fight for freedom. Let's get right to it.
Before we zoom in on specific countries, we have to understand what exactly these people were fighting against. Colonial domination wasn't just, randomly drawing lines on a map. It happened when foreign powers moved in to basically extract a region's resources, dominate its government, and totally control its economy. I mean, even massive countries like China were at one point independent in name only. They were forced to give up economic and political concessions like super low import taxes to foreign powers. And it's this widespread extraction, like a giant vacuum cleaner sucking up resources, that really sparked the rebellion. It pushed everyday people to finally say enough, wake up, organize, and fight back.
Section 2, China's road to republic. Let's head over to East Asia for our very first case study. China's 20th century history is, quite honestly, a dizzying sequence of events. It's a lot, so let's map it out right here so we don't get lost in the dates. In 1911, the Manchu Empire is overthrown and a republic is established. Sounds great, right? But that doesn't actually bring peace. In 1919, the May 4th movement erupts. These are massive, angry protests against foreign control over China's resources. Then, by 1921, the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, is founded. And finally, after literal decades of turmoil, the People's Republic is formed in 1949. Now, the blueprint for modern China is actually fascinating. Sun Yat-sen, who's widely regarded as the founder of modern China, he looked at the country's huge problems and came up with a program called the Sun Minchi, or the Three Principles. First, nationalism. Kick out the foreign imperialists and the Manchu dynasty. Second, democracy. Let the actual people govern. And third, socialism. Regulate capital and redistribute land to the millions of landless peasants. He really hit the nail on the head here. These 3 points identified exactly what the people desperately needed.
But unfortunately, after Sun Yat-sen, China fell into absolute turmoil. It led to a massive civil war between two main forces. To keep this super simple for your exam prep, on one side we have the Kuomintang, or KMT, under Chiang Kai-shek. They focused heavily on militarism, unified behavior, and building an urban base. But they totally ignored the peasantry and their desperate need for land. On the other side, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, under Mao Zedong, took a completely different path. They built their power out in the rural areas, focusing on peasant land reform and even supporting the creation of rural women's associations. Now, both sides did actually join forces briefly to fight the Japanese invasion from 1937 to 1945, but as soon as Japan surrendered, it was just all-out war for control of China. So what happened when the CCP ultimately won? Well, look at this number, 43%. By 1952, the new Chinese government had redistributed about 43% of China's cultivated land to roughly 60% of the rural population. That is a massive, massive economic reform. But, as our sources point out, we have to recognize that this historical shift was brutally violent. The process of class identification and confiscating all that land involved public humiliation and the execution of 10 to 20 lakh landlords. Section 3, Vietnam fights two empires. Let's shift south for our next case study to a nation that had to fight off multiple colonizers.
To really understand Vietnam's revolution, we have to look at the initial spark of their exploitation. The French took direct control of Vietnam in the mid-19th century, and their strategy was 100% about extraction. They went in and improved the irrigation networks in the Mekong Delta. But wait, they didn't do it to feed the local people. They did it so they could export rice. They encouraged wealthy landlordism, completely squeezing out the small peasants.
Because of this setup, by 1931, Vietnam was actually the third largest rice exporter in the entire world. Meanwhile, the local peasants who grew the rice were just falling deeper and deeper into debt and extreme poverty. The French colonizers also had this idea of a civilizing mission. They genuinely thought they were bringing the benefits of modern civilization, mostly through education. But the reality? The school textbooks just glorified the French and tried to justify colonial rule. But there is a brilliant irony here. Vietnamese teachers and students started using the very schools the French built to secretly modify texts, criticize the regime, and literally spark modern nationalism. They were forming student political parties and publishing nationalist journals right under the colonizers' noses. Then, during World War II, Japan occupied Vietnam, so now the Vietnamese had to fight both the French and the Japanese. Under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, a group called the Viet Minh fought back. When they finally declared independence and formed a republic in 1945, they immediately enacted a 25% reduction in land rents. Boom. Just like that, fulfilling the long-cherished dream of the peasant class. But sadly, independence didn't mean peace. After a grueling 8-year war that finally defeated the French in 1954, the country was split into North and South. The U.S., terrified at the spread of communism, entered the conflict to support the South. And this phase of the war, it was just devastating. The U.S. used brutal chemical weapons, things like napalm and Agent Orange, destroying entire villages and vast stretches of jungle. Yet, U.S. planners vastly underestimated the sheer unbreakable power of peasant nationalism. Those earlier land reforms had inspired a population that ultimately managed to outlast the most technologically advanced military in the world, which led to a U.S. withdrawal and the final unification of Vietnam in 1975. All right, Section 4, Nigeria, Forging One Nation. We're crossing over to Africa now to look at a very different kind of challenge. How do you build a single nation when colonial borders force entirely different groups of people together? The country we know as Nigeria today was actually created by the British, kind of drawn up around the Niger River system. The British were there because they wanted agricultural products, specifically palm oil. And to keep control of the area, they used the oldest trick in the book: divide and rule. They actively kept the major regions separate. They isolated the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the northern tribal groups from one another. They pushed modern education in the south, but encouraged pre-modern traditions in the north. This created massive, deep regional disparities, making it incredibly difficult for the Nigerian people to form any sort of united opposition against the British. So how did they get past that? Well, they built a path to freedom in 4 distinct steps. Step 1. In the 1920s, Western-educated intellectuals, like Herbert Macaulay, started developing the idea of a common Nigerian nation and formed the NNDP. Step 2. Fast forward to 1936, and Nnamdi Azikiwe helped grow the Nigerian youth movement, which deliberately appealed to all Nigerians, totally regardless of their cultural background. Step 3. In 1944, they brilliantly united to form a powerful coalition called the NCNC. And finally, Step 4. All this pan-nationalist pressure worked. It forced the British to hand over power, and independence was officially won on October 1, 1963. But post-independence Nigeria faced immense hurdles, everything from a tragic civil war to strict military rule. And this brings up one of their major modern challenges. Back in the 1950s, oil was discovered in the Niger Delta. Now, while that brought huge wealth to multinational corporations and military rulers, the local ecosystem totally paid the price. And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. The ecological cost was just staggering. It's estimated that 5 to 10% of the crucial mangrove ecosystems have been wiped out by clearing or oil spills. This damage contaminated their drinking water and ruined crops, which led to massive local unrest in the 1990s as people rightfully demanded compensation and control over their own land's resources. Section 5, the price of independence. We've seen 3 incredible journeys today. Let's tie them all together. All right, for all my 10th graders out there studying for exams, listen up. This is your ultimate exam-ready slide. Seriously, take a screenshot or copy this down right now. It perfectly summarizes the spark, the catalyst, and the fire for each nation we've just studied. In China, which was exploited by multiple powers, the big challenge post-empire was a massive civil war followed by drastic, violent land reform. Over in Vietnam, exploited by the French for rice and rubber, the post-independence nightmare was a devastating war with the U.S. that involved heavy chemical weapons. And in Nigeria, colonized by Britain for palm oil, the aftermath included a civil war, military rule, and severe ecological damage from petroleum extraction. And that brings us to our final big thought for the day. Is gaining independence the end of the struggle, or is it really just the beginning? As we've seen in China, Vietnam, and Nigeria,
Kicking out the colonizers was this incredible historic achievement. I mean, it was fueled by the immense willpower of ordinary, everyday people. But the civil wars, the environmental damage, and the political turmoil that followed in all these places show us that building a unified, fair nation is a whole new, entirely different battle. I'd love for you and your teachers to use this as a discussion prompt today in class. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those great questions, and I'll see you all next time.